Hey neighbors, Kevin here with etrailer, and today we're going to be showing you how to install the Roadmaster Universal Diode Kit for towed vehicles here in our 2022 GMC Sierra 1500. If you're looking to flat tow your 2022 GMC Sierra 1500, then there's going to be a few components that you're going to need. Now typically when it comes to flat towing, there's going to be 5 main components. The first one being your tow bar, and the second one being your base plate to make that physical connection between your vehicle and then the coach. Along with that, we're also going to have some safety cables, which you can see are bracketed to our tow bar so that it's all nice and held up so it's not dragging down on the ground. Next, we're going to have our diode wiring, or if you want to go with a kind of plug-in magnetic light at the back, just some way so that you can transfer your light signals from the motorhome back to the towed vehicle so that you can remain street legal. Along with that, you will also need to have a supplemental braking system. Now, in most states, you are going to have that required at a certain weight, or just in general, it's going to be required. So you might want to check your local laws. Even if your state doesn't require you to have it, if you're traveling to another one, you can get a ticket if you get pulled over and they find out you don't have one in a state where it is required. Now, along with those 5 main components, there typically is going to be something else you might have to install depending on the vehicle. In our case, with the Sierra today, we had to have the battery disconnected. So instead of every single time you want to flat tow, disconnecting the negative battery cable, we installed a Roadmaster battery disconnect so that way you can just disconnect and reconnect the battery at the push of a button. Along with that, something I recommend for every single flat tow is a charge line kit, and what that's going to do is trickle charge from the motorhome back to the battery on your towed vehicle. We have a few things like our braking system that are going to be connected directly to the battery, so they're going to be draining the battery even though our vehicle isn't on and running. There's nothing else in there that's going to be running. There's still a drain on it just because this braking system is pulling from it, and a few other items that we needed to tap into that are all running off that. So in this case, along with our braking system, we also had to install a stoplight switch kit, and that's because GM doesn't have a brake light switch that you can tap into because they use a multiplex wire that's just not big enough for you to really make those connections. So now we have multiple components that are all pulling from the battery. So having that charge line to make sure that your battery isn't going to be dead when you get to your destination is going to be a huge game changer. With a diode kit being one of the 5 main components for flat towing, it is, in my opinion, arguably the second most important piece of our project here, just because this is what's allowing everyone else around us to see exactly what we're intending to do. So that means late at night, we have our lights still showing through so that no one accidentally comes up too close and hits us on the highway. If we're trying to make a turn or just switch lanes, everyone can see exactly what we need to do and we can safely make that trip over. If we take a closer look, you can see right up front we have that motorhome with our hazards on, and you can see right here at the back it has our hazards on as well. And that is the whole goal right here, is that we're transferring that light signal over and then it's doing it properly. Now there's a lot of options that you can go with. There's splicing kits like this one, there's plug-in kits, and then there's also the old basic magnetic lights. Now when it comes to a truck, there's not really a good spot to put a magnetic light because typically you got plastic here or you have aluminum if you have a Ford bed. So there's nothing to really stick that magnet to, and honestly it's super ugly having those wires draped across the whole truck, and then on top of that, that's going to be whacking around and smacking up the truck, and just it's not a good look. When it comes to plug-in kits, I personally have seen a lot of issues with them, so I tend to try and stay away from that because once you have an issue with it, there's nothing you can do. You have to rip the whole thing out and replace it all because it is a custom fit. Now when it comes to diodes, if I have an issue with maybe one diode going out, all I have to do is pop out that tail light, cut off that diode, swap it out, and we're good to go. We can be back up and running so that it doesn't ruin our trip. So when you're picking out your diode wiring kit, it's super important to know exactly what kind of tow bar you're going to go with. So with our etrailer XD, or XHD, sorry, this is going to have a little rod that allows you to put a coiled cable on. And you could kind of do it with a straight one, but it's not really going to hold it up well. The goal here is that we don't want our cable dragging on the ground. We have a lot of people come in because they didn't secure their cable, and then it's all shredded up here, and you're wasting money on something that's super easy to fix, right at the start. So When it comes to these kits, you can typically get either a straight cable, a straight to coiled, where it's got just a small section of coil, and then the other majority of it's going to be straight, or you can get the all coiled one like this one right here. So this is what I'm going to recommend anytime I have a tow bar that doesn't have a cage. So some of the Roadmaster ones will have a little cage on the outside that you could slide your cable through, and that just helps keep it up off the ground. You don't have any issues with it dragging, and just overall gives it some protection. Since we don't have that with this tow bar, a coiled one is going to be the right option. And then there's obviously some other tow bars where there's different style cages where that coiled to straight is going to be the better option. So if you need help deciding that, just reach out to us and we'd be happy to help you out. Now this kit's going to give you everything that you need to do your standard install here, but the one thing that you might run into is when it comes to the mounting location, depending on the trim package, the standard nuts and bolts that they give you might not be exactly what you need just to get it mounted up. I ended up using a different bracket to mount this up in place. I probably could have still used the one that they give you, but I wanted something that had enough of an arm to reach out to some structural metal, so that way I could also mount up my breakaway switch to it and know that there's no way that if this ever got pulled, that it would also yank the breakaway switch out of like plastic. So having that bolted down to some metal really gave me a lot of security and made me feel a whole lot better about it. Now, getting this installed, honestly, it's really not that hard. When you compare it to a plug-in kit, you're still taking the taillights out. So the big thing that's scary here is really just splicing into the wire, but it's not really that hard. It's something you could do at home if you just have the proper instructions to do so. So with that said, if that isn't something you want to do, or maybe you just don't have the time and tools to do so, then please use our dealer locator. You can just enter in your zip code and find a shop to get it professionally installed. If you're wanting to do this yourself and you just need that instruction to get through it, stick around and we'll show you how we did it. So starting off our diode wiring install, we want to make sure that we have a good spot for our connector to sit. With this trim package, there's really not a great spot on the sides like I've seen in a lot of other pictures. This is typically one giant flat spot right here. With this trim, it kind of comes in and then there's some other stuff behind it, so I don't really want to cut into that. But luckily right here in the center, this piece, this is all wide open on the back side, so we're going to cut right through that and we'll mount up our plug here as well as our breakaway switch right next to it. And being right under the license plate, it's going to make a real easy connection point when we set up our tow bar and get hooked up to our motorhome. Now, because I'm going to come through right here, I've tied off a little bit excess so that way I have some room to work with. And then we're going to run this. I ran it right up where that pan is going to be covering, so that way it'll help hold it up out of the way. And then I just tried to trace wiring and make sure I'm staying away from anything that's going to move or generate heat. So I'll add a few more zip ties in once we fully finish, and I know that I'm good to go back there. I don't need to pull anymore. But we come right up through this area here where the engine is. There's a bunch of wiring that comes up over the wheel well, and then we start seeing the frame. So if you come right here, you can see me coming over, and then we're sitting on top of the frame. I was really trying to stay away from this exhaust. So I am gonna, like I said, I'll have to zip tie a bunch because there is a wire harness that's right above the frame rail hidden back here. I'll zip tie two, and then we're just gonna keep running down the frame rail all the way through here. I did come down at this point so I'd have something to kind of tie to. But other than that, we're sticking up on the frame rail and above the gas tank. And then once we get past the gas tank, still coming along the frame rail, there is the shock in the way, so I put it above the shock mount. And then I slipped it past more through the frame, and right now we just have it coming down. Now we can lower our vehicle and pop up the taillights and get this ran up to it. Now back at our taillights, we're going to have two screws we're going to be taking out, and those are going to require a T15 Torx bit. Then we can start to pry our tail light out. It's going to have a couple push pins holding it in. There we go. And just so that we don't have this dangling here. I'll pry up on this red tab, get that out enough, and then push down on the tan part here to help push this out. There we go. And then there's just a little clip holding the wiring on here. I'll pop that out of the way. And then down inside here is where we're going to try and trace up our wiring. So I'm going to grab a fish stick. I'll shoot that down because I want to hide all of it back in here because there's plenty of room. That's going to be a perfect spot for our diodes to sit. So there is a little piece of the frame rail here that we're hopping right over. Staying away from our exhaust. Make sure you don't get too close to this because you'll burn up your wiring. And then once you get it in, we can tape the end of this to our fish stick here. There we go. Now that we have our wiring traced over here, we are going to turn on our truck and test for function here so that we know which wire to splice into. You can use just a little tester like this typically. You can get it in there. Sometimes you can't, and then you gotta actually poke into it. If you don't have a tester, we offer a hook and probe tester here that you would just push up on. You get that wire in there, and then you can press into it with the little poke end of this, and then it'll light up if it has power. So we were able to look out. This did get enough contact to actually show. So that right there is gonna be our running lights. We got a solid, that's our brown wire. And then we've looked, it's that dark green right there at the bottom in the middle is going to be our left turn. You can see the light bulbs flashing, showing that we're getting intermittent power, showing us that that's our left turn. All right, I'm gonna have a bit of excess here, probably about a foot. I'm gonna keep just in case we need a little bit of room to maneuver stuff around, and when you're taking the taillight on and off, you don't want that gonna be so tight that it won't want to come out, and then you have your diodes disconnecting. So we'll cut off the little bit of excess here that we have left. Now, another thing you can do, I just skipped it because I'd prefer to have two different wires running over, so we obviously aren't going to have enough length to make it over to the other side. I have a bunch of excess wiring, so it's not a big deal for me to just jump her over to there. But if you didn't have that excess, what you could do is before running all of your wiring through, at the very front of the vehicle where we had this tie in, just separate the ground wire, so that white wire, just pull it off, ground right at the front, and then you have the whole length of white wire to run your jumpers for your running lights and your right turn signal from the left side over to the right side. Pull our wire apart just a bit, give us some room to work. Now the brown wire is going to be our running light, and the yellow is going to be our left turn, green is going to be our right turn, and then ground, we're just going to put a ring terminal on this and ground right inside the housing here for our tail light. Cut back our casing. In your kit there's going to be a little blue ring terminal. We'll crimp that on as well. Not get my glove in it. And you're also going to have a self-tapper included in your kit. We'll run that through, and I'm just going to stick it right here so that it's out of the way, but it's accessible if we ever have an issue later on down the road. There we go. And then the excess wire we can just shove it into the back here. Well, luckily, brown is also going to be our running light circuit for our diode wiring. So we're going to match that up with our jumper that's going to run over to the other side as well. We'll spin those two up together. And then that yellow or spade terminal connector that we have, we're going to put that on there and crimp it down. And then that would run to one side of our diode, and then the vehicle wiring is going to run into the other. So we'll crimp on one of the little blue ones onto our factory wiring. And then another one on the other side for the factory wiring. Then we'll have that run to the out, and that other side coming in is going to run to the in. And push all this down. Now for our left turn, which is our yellow wire coming from our diode wiring, we're going to be splicing that with our little green wire here for our left turn. These are all going to be getting spade terminaled up to our diode. So if you want, you can just crimp one on right now. Take a blue spade terminal. Get that on. Get another one on our factory wiring side. Twist that up, make it a little bit stiffer. Push through our spade terminal. And then one more for the output for our diode. Connect it up just like so. Now for our right turn, I'm going to connect that to the green wire that I have with our yellow wire that we're running over for our running lights. So for this, we're just going to use a butt connector, and I'm going to use a heat shrink. That way we can protect this, just because there is always the opportunity for water to get in here. So any little bit of extra protection we can do is going to make this last a whole lot longer. Pop on our heat shrink. Add in our diode wiring. Now we'll shrink that down with a heat gun. Now I'm going to peel back the adhesive backing. We're just going to stick our two diodes together. A good squeeze. And then we're going to wrap this all up in some electrical tape, kind of help protect it. All the excess wiring, I'm just going to push back. And we got plenty of room here, and the taillights we're really not pushing too far into this cavity, so we're pretty good. But we'll pop the taillight back on. Make sure that we push in that little red clip. Up and then push. There we go. Now that that's locked in place, we can put our taillight back in. We'll get those two little bumper push pins in, and then we can secure it with our screws. All right, we're lined up. Those hands started. Now I'm just going to do the same thing over here. We're going to be taking the taillight out first, then we'll lift up so we can trace our wiring over. That way it's all kind of in one thing. And I'm also going to stick a fish stick down through there, make our job a whole lot easier once we do have our wiring over. All right, so I have my jumper ran over and we're attached to our fish stick already, but just to give you an idea what you should do, We are right behind, so this is the part of the bed where you typically see between the tailgate. So you can see there's even a rock sitting here, which is pretty typical if you're trying to haul anything. Always get some debris down in there. But I came up over our frame right here for our hitch, and then I ran that, and there's wiring that runs across this so that it's staying up above the spare tire, so that way we don't have any interaction between the two. And I just zip tied it at every wire that I could touch. And then we came right back over the frame the same way, and we're tucked up kind of back behind this support rod. That way we can pull straight up into our taillight area. All right, so now that we have our wiring in, and we've already tested the plug, so it's actually going to be exactly the same as it was over on our driver's side. The brown wire is our running light circuit, and then the darker green is our turn signal. So that's going to be our right turn. So I'm going to hook this up exactly the same way as we did over there, except for we just don't have that jumper we have to deal with. So it's going to be our vehicle side, and then our diode side, and then just the output going right out into our connector, and we'll plug back in our tail light. Now that we have all of our spade terminals on, we can begin linking it all together. So my brown was my running lights, and on my wiring side, that's yellow. So I'll have that go in. Then on the green side, we had our green wire. On there, nice and tight. Then we'll do the same thing. We'll just tape those two together using the double-sided tape on the back. Give them a good squeeze. And then we can just secure this all up with some more electrical tape. With our plug all taped back up, we can reconnect it to our tail light. Make sure that we press in that locking tab. And then we'll reinstall our tail light and move our way to the front, so that way we can start installing our 6-pole plug so that we can actually test all of our wiring. Now to figure out where we can mount our breakaway switch and also our 6-pole socket, in the kit you got this for the 6-pole socket. We're not going to be using that one just because I needed something a little bit bigger because there's not really much to grab onto here. So we have another similar option that's a little bit bigger, has a larger tab on it, but I did end up cutting one off. That way I can get it in place over here. So the idea is going to be that once I drill out some holes for us to slide this through, it's going to mount to this harder support plastic right here. This will be on the outside of the vehicle, so on the outside of that fascia, and then we'll have our 6-pole socket come through that, and then our breakaway is going to mount right up to this bracket here too, because there's 2 different holes in it. So I'm going to probably go with that first one, and if not, I can just drill a second one a little bit further back if that's sticking out too much. But for the 6-pole, all we need to do is just drill out a hole for that wiring to pass through, because I'll have this side of the bracket out on the front of the vehicle. I've got my bracket all ready for my 6-pole, but since I had to trim it down just a bit, I did want to paint back over it, so I've got that drying right now. And while we wait, I'm going to fish a wire for our stoplight switch, because we're going to run that to the battery for power. And then we're also going to have an air line, and that air line is going to connect between our main unit and then also the air cylinder that we're going to clamp onto the brake pedal. So I'm going to fish these through just like I did with the wire harness for the G-force controller. We'll pump that in and get it ran over to the battery, and then this will be going to our main operating unit. So now we have our bracket mounted in place. On the back side we had that one tab which I cut off from this side. It's sitting back, and there's a harder plastic that's for the structure right behind this, and that's what I have bolted through. And then also through that hole I have our breakaway switch running through that, so that way it's connected to metal, so that way if we ever did have a breakaway situation and it has to yank on this, we're not going to rip it right out of the plastic. But that's all bolted down, and we'll have 2 more bolts that are going to run through here. But before we do that, we need to wire up our 6-pole socket. So that'll go on, and then I have my hardware already ready, and I also painted it too, so that way it'll match. Once it's on there, we'll have an all nice black look. So So that'll go on, and then I have some washers and nuts that are going to go on the back side of that and help clamp it down, so that way we get a little bit more of a spread out, because this is all plastic. It's easy for plastic to break instead of just connecting to metal. So the more I can do to distribute that pressure, it's going to help not break anything down if we do have an accident later on. But we can roll down on the back side here and give you a better look of what it looks like inside as well. All right, so on the back here, I've got our bolt coming through, and I have a nice big washer I'm going to stick on the back of that too, just because we're going between two ridges. So I'm really only going to get about half of the washer actually compressing down on the plastic, but it's going to be a whole lot better than just a small nut on the end of that. So with all that mounted up, we can now switch over to the other wiring we have in place over here. So on our breakaway switch, we're going to have our black wire running to the blue wire that we've ran from our operating unit, and then the orange wire is going to run up to the brown wire that's from our operating unit, and then that's going to run over to our power source, which is going to be our battery. And we also have a little red wire here, and that is going to connect to the center post on our 6-pole socket, and that is for our charge line. So that way when the battery, or when we're hooked up to our coach, the coach's battery can help recharge the battery in our towed vehicle as well. All right, now before we wire this up, make sure that you have your boot on the back side there, and with the larger portion facing out, because this is what's going to seal up the back side of our 6-pole socket. Push that back out. All right, now that I've separated each of my wires, we'll strip back just a bit of casing on each one. So if we look at the back here, these are all labeled, so it makes your job a whole lot easier. The top is going to be your trailer running lights. It says TM. Next to that is GD, and that's going to be our ground. Down here at the bottom is our left turn. We have our right turn, and then this spot right here is essentially just a spare spot. This would be for like a brake signal, but since we're not running anything through, this one we're just going to leave closed. And then in the center is going to be our charge line spot. So what you'll do is slide in your wire. Make sure you have it firmly in there, and then start tightening up that set screw. Give it a nice tug, make sure it's not going anywhere, and then we can move on to our next wire. So for this, our yellow is going to be our left turn, green's our right turn, brown is our running lights, and white is our ground. Okay. It's a little tight. And the last thing is just going to be tidying up all of your wiring with some zip ties, help secure it away so nothing can accidentally grab it. All right, now we can test our diode wiring. So we'll start out with our running lights, our left turn, brake lights, right turn, and that is it. Well, I think that covers it for our look at the Roadmaster Universal Diode Kit for towed vehicles here on our 2022 GMC Sierra 1500. My name's Kevin, and if you're still looking for the right diode kit for your GMC Sierra 1500, please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out on your journey.